it's so funny because the title on Mario's profile is no echo chambers, so I find it hilarious that every fucking space he has is a goddamn echo chamber. But anyway, this guy is not worth our fucking
Yeah.
time, man. Shit. Uh,
And
anyway,
no, maybe just real quickly on that, maybe a lot of people don't know this, but a lot of the listeners are not real, they're fake. And the easiest way to figure this out is right now, if you scroll all the way to the down at the bottom, you shall see other listeners. It says like two other
this is true.
listeners. And that means they're web listeners, meaning they're bots. But Mario Spaces, it doesn't matter if there's 5,000 people, 12,000, or 50,000. His real listeners are only ever 1,000, and you could clearly see this in other listeners. That's very bizarre. So he pays them, I guess. I don't know how he makes money off this, but it's bizarre.
Mario is, I mean, yeah, if you haven't, I really highly recommend just you can. I think the best stuff on him is actually still on Twitter. I would recommend anybody in this space just look that up because the stories are insane.
Have you read the Protos
Oh
article?
yeah, or you can read the Protos article. I forgot about that. Yeah, read that. I mean that summarizes a lot of the stuff he's been up to, which is just again, it's unbelievable that the richest man in the world is like promoting this guy, but maybe not. Maybe it's not all that unbelievable to be
I was
honest.
just
But
gonna say, is it really?
no, I mean, but it's just the
I,
fact is that that's the problem is that these guys actually do control the narrative to some extent. I mean, they really do manage to do that, and it's scary because like they're not that smart, and they're all desperately trying to keep people in the game for as long as possible, and obviously that's the only way they can keep it afloat. But it's not going to work. But they're certainly going to try. So you want to move on to Binance
yeah,
or
let's. I mean, I feel like we can talk a lot about Tether, but let's get through Binance. So like, I think there's a pretty distinct uh difference between the Coinbase lawsuits and the Binance
yeah,
lawsuits, right? I mean, Coinbase is just kind of like, yeah, you're running your business illegally as an exchange, as a broker dealer, as a clearinghouse. There are a slew of conflicts of interest in running those three business lines, and it's a problem. And you uh, allow your customers to trade unregistered securities. So you either register or you get the hell out. And the business doesn't even work illegally, so it's not going to work legally, right? So they fucking they don't make any money uh on institutional, and they're losing like essentially after February, they lost all the retail users, or a vast majority of them. They just stopped trading,
right.
right? And now TradFi is coming for their lunch on the institutional side. So they're gonna get screwed on both ends, right? On the customers that they actually make money on, and on the ones they don't. So, the take rate on the retail customers is like 168 bips if you're going by last quarter. And on institutional, it's only 2 bips. So it just doesn't
Right.
work, right? And everyone talks about the pie in the sky, like ancillary businesses that are just completely marginal relative to trading. So I don't really get the whole bull case. I mean, at best, it'll be a much, much, much smaller business in a year or two. Um, but I'd love to hear uh, your take. Oh, right, we're gonna go back to Binance. But anyway, for Binance, you know, I have a strong hunch that from the CFTC complaint and the SEC lawsuit, the vast majority of those findings came from the DOJ.
Yeah.
Like in what scenario does a civil agency go out of their way to to seek out private messages from Signal, from email, from text message? Like, I'm sorry. It's like all or the vast majority of those findings are from the DOJ. And people should remember that the DOJ is limited on what they can provide to a civil agency, but a civil agency could provide whatever they want to the DOJ. So I have a feeling that the DOJ is keeping a lot of the good stuff, and that criminal indictment on money laundering, on violations of BSA and market manipulation are coming down the pipe. And yeah, would love your take. And also, I want your opinion because I actually spoke to Cryptodomist about this, who I'm sure you know well, and I think that his view is one that I agree with. That it's kind of hard to implicate Binance in money laundering if you don't implicate Tether as well,
I mean, it depends on
right?
it. Okay, so let's start with the differences between the SEC case against Binance and the SEC case against Coinbase. I mean, the Coinbase lawsuit focuses exclusively on offering trading in unregistered securities, right? Like whether it's the staking programs or or there's certain violations I think of like exchange, like definitions of what an exchange can be and what it can't be, and how they're holding customer assets and simultaneously like they're fulfilling multiple steps in the process when they should be like separate entities. But Binance, they're accusing them of fraud, and they're accusing them of fraud in multiple places, including market manipulation, essentially creating a fake company in order to trick U.S. regulators into letting them do business in the U.S., despite the fact that they weren't supposed to be. And there's a lot of allusions in this lawsuit to illegal activity, market manipulation being one of them, but also there are these hints that they've been engaging in money laundering. I believe it was a CFTC lawsuit that mentioned the quote where they were talking about moving money for Hamas, like jokingly, where they had a customer who was using, I believe it was Hydra, the Bitcoin, basically a Bitcoin mixer that was run by the Russians that was used for drug trafficking and other things, and basically saying like, well, this guy, he's dirty, but we're going to keep him as a customer. We'll just have him make a new account rather than, having him use the account he's using right now. But we're not going to kick him off our platform, even though we know that he's a criminal, right? And so if you look at like these civil agencies they're not trying to prove something like money laundering. They're just trying to prove within their narrow purview the things that fall under their jurisdiction, right? But what they're doing in both of their lawsuits, which I think is very interesting, and it's something that a number of people, including John Stark, who's a former SEC enforcement attorney, who's very knowledgeable about these things, was remarking on, which is that it's pretty uncommon for the SEC to do that, right? Like there's a point in the SEC complaint against Binance where they outright refer to quote unquote reports in the media that the Department of Justice is coming after them. And that's like, they don't do that very often, if ever, right? So that tells you that they think something's coming or they know something's coming. And I think money laundering is going to be the key part of, or at least one of the key parts of the case against Binance that when it goes criminal. And there's a few reasons for that. Number one, essentially, if you think about what they already have showed, right? There are three major elements for money laundering cases, right? The first one is you have to have an awareness of the legal origin of funds. So Binance clearly, based just on the CFTC lawsuit alone, had examples where they knew the money was coming from illegal sources and they chose to continue to provide services. The second element is that they were involved in the transaction. I mean, they're the ones literally facilitating the transaction, so they got them on that. And then their participation in transfer layering and implementation, which is a little more complicated. But you can pretty much see that the SEC and the CFTC have already basically shown like there's a lot of pretty good evidence that they've engaged in money laundering. And it just so happens that Binance has hired one of the premier experts in money laundering in the United States, a former DOJ prosecutor who ran the money laundering like division at the DOJ for a few years, to be their defense attorney. And they said, well, it's part of our SEC case, but the SEC case does not touch on money laundering. So why would they spend all this money to hire somebody who's an expert in money laundering unless they anticipate being charged with it? And then the question about whether or not Tether needs to be involved in that, it depends on which part of the transfers they focus on, right? If they just focus on Binance's banking, right, they don't necessarily need to talk about stablecoins at all. If you just look at the corporate structures that they've implemented to move funds between their various entities, to obfuscate flows, the fact that they were moving money from Binance US through, I think it was either Merit Peak or Sigma Chain. I can't remember which. One of CZ's market making companies that's supposedly a separate company. They would take the money into their account and then send it to the main Binance exchange or elsewhere. I mean, if you look at those structures, I don't know if Tether needs to be involved or not, but I think that the likelihood of them being charged with money laundering offenses in addition to other things is, I think it's very, very likely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's just, I mean, look, the CFTC complaint obviously talked about money laundering for Hamas. If you looked at the SEC forensic accountant's declaration from the Binance lawsuit, I mean, you don't have to be a math genius to figure out that the flow of funds there is clearly money laundering, or at least a vast majority of it is. I mean, it's like money coming in to a Binance account at Silvergate or Signature. It's coming out. It's going into another bank account at
Yeah.
Silvergate or Signature that is also a Binance account. But yeah, the main one was Merit Peak, and that's basically CZ's number one wash trading entity.
Right.
It's Sigma Chain, but he's got 300
Right.
others, right?
Oh, at least. I mean, that's the
You
thing we
know,
don't even know.
at
And that's
least, right?
where
At
it
least.
gets, and this is something that I've tried to work on and I've been doing a little bit with is the venture capital aspect of this, right? Because Binance has its own venture investment party. And this is something that hasn't been focused on the lawsuits at all. But like, this is how complicated.
Binance
Right.
Labs,
So
yeah.
like they're dumping all this money into these quote unquote venture portfolio companies that oftentimes do absolutely nothing but move money around. So like there's another layer of complexity even there. And FTX was doing the same thing, right? So like that's the problem is this is so fucking complicated that like it could take a very long time to unravel it. I'm not surprised it's taken so long um, for the regulators to take a move on this, just because this is like, I mean, it's a massive, massive criminal enterprise, and the question of like who
Yeah.
they're actually working for, or like who really controls this thing, and same question's true for FTX as well. I mean, we don't know.
Do you do you think that there's going to be something separate involving like what's happened with venture capital with all of
Oh,
this, right? Like the ICO dynamics, et cetera. Like, is that
huh.
kind of because that's a different
Oh,
question, but a really
it's a
big
really
picture,
important
right? A
question.
really big part of the
That's a
picture.
really good question. I mean, I certainly hope so. But the problem is that it's always so hard to you have to prove like somebody individually was responsible, and that's difficult. I mean, I think, the one example that's been running around a lot lately was David Sachs and Chamath and what's his name, Kalkanis, when they were on that podcast and they were talking about dumping Solana on people essentially. If you had something like that, maybe you can get them, but like it's difficult to prove.
Solana had its own class, had its
Yeah,
own
but I'm
lawsuit
saying
though,
like
right? So that
enforcement
one's
going after
different.
them. Like they should. I really do think they should at least try. But um, the problem is again they've layered this through, and that's an example where this is almost all money laundering because there's so many layers of complexity to it intentionally. Is that like you have them doing it through like these. So like if David Saxon invests in Solana and he benefits from the market manipulation and other activities that drive the price up, he knows it's happening, maybe he doesn't, maybe he's involved, maybe he isn't, but it's really hard to prove that. So that's going to be the problem is that it's like where do you draw the line? It's like if you think about how I was speaking with someone who is very knowledgeable about these things off the record, and he was saying how amazed he was that SEC was going after Coinbase and Binance simultaneously, just because it's so difficult and takes so much of their resources. So like you have to take a step back and realize actually that it's incredible, but in the United States, actually, our regulatory bodies aren't that well resourced to go after big, complex cases. I mean, part of the problem probably is that they're used to settling, right? Like most of the time, like they catch one of these big banks doing something stupid or fraudulent, they'll just settle with them, which I think that's a problem too. But they're not used to necessarily having to fight these cases out tooth and nail. And the fact that they took on Coinbase and Binance was shocking to this person. So like the fact that they did those, and then are they going to go after like every VC capital from? They should, They absolutely should, but whether or not they will, I don't know.
Well,
Yeah.
and what do you think about resource wise, right? Because there is a really big history. I mean, I guess we're going to go back to Tether and some of these other things, but there is a history, right, of other regulatory bodies, like with these
Right.
cases, and then they're just being like a slap on the
Yeah.
wrist, right? Or here, this is something bad you did in the back, and back then, this is how you're going to change, and then also pay us a
Right.
fee, right? There's like that dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is the Tether lawsuit was settled with the CFTC and with the New York Attorneys General, and the problem is the CFTC has very little power, right? Like they of the various regulatory bodies, they're pretty toothless, and that's why the crypto lobby has been fighting so hard to have them be the predominant regulator for the space, is because there's absolutely no way the CFTC could do it. So that's part of it. Um, and yeah, I just don't, Tether is just like, that's a whole separate question just because I don't know what's going on with that one. It seems to me that there's a lot of evidence at this point that they've engaged in a variety of illegal activities going back years. That's pretty strong evidence. People have been convicted based on that evidence that you would think would apply to them as well, and yet nothing has happened yet. So my assumption is that there's an active investigation into them, and we're going to find out about it sooner rather than later. But who knows?
I mean, this
I think
goes
that
back to the original question, though. Why would BlackRock and all these TradFi institutions come out with ETF
Right.
registrations when the whole reason for the rejections in the past were because of market manipulation and singling out Tether as the primary culprit
well,
for the manipulation? So it just
not
doesn't make
Tiger.
sense. It just doesn't make sense. Why
I
would they do it in the most precarious period in crypto's life cycle?
also just real quick as you guys talk about this, right? Like Tether's business, like they've made, changes, right, since the lawsuit that
What?
there's been the disclosure around. I mean, they have that could like, but you and I have talked about that.
Well, I
That's a
mean, the
separate
question
conversation.
is that you can make all sorts of changes on paper, but the question is how many changes have actually been made in practice, right? Because it's a really hard question when somebody's just telling you something is true, and you know it's not hard to get somebody to sign off on bullshit, right? Like especially when they're still doing attestations, they've never done an audit. And that's the problem with. I mean, the thing for me is any stablecoin, like it really shouldn't be hard to audit that, right? Like it's a money market fund. They literally have in the case of like USDC, for example, they just literally just have treasuries and cash, right? Like that shouldn't be hard to audit that. Tether's a little more complicated, but like in theory, it shouldn't be impossible, right? So it's like, what are they doing that's so complicated that precludes having an independent person take a look and sign off on it to that extent? Because the attestation process is pretty minimal. So all I would say is I just wouldn't take anything Tether says at face value because they've been proven to lie.
I'm not taking it at face value. I just understand that based on something smaller that a lot of
Let me
people
ask you something.
don't.
Can I just say something?
Uh,
Just really quick. Because
uh,
if you're going by Tether's numbers, right? So,
I
so
wasn't.
let's just
That's not
break
where I
this
was
down.
gonna go though.
Let's
I
just
was just
break this
gonna.
down. Okay. If you're going by their quote unquote legitimate numbers, okay, they are on track to generate more profit than BlackRock. Does that make any sense? Because I don't think it does. Right? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, what was your
I mean,
question? I mean, so I'm just curious, like what you were thinking. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Me or yeah. Well, yeah, no, just that there is this specific um thing that they've become a part of, and there was, it's my understanding that they were given a couple choices about how to make that project a reality, right? And I don't know which one they chose, but like, have they had enough time to clean up their act completely, right? Like, meaningfully, number one. Number two, if they did take one of those options to get into that specific into that specific thing that's now live, like maybe they did, maybe they didn't, right? But and they changed a couple of other like meaningful things on the attestation side, et cetera. Like I'm not saying Tether is like squeaky clean. I'm just asking the question if there's enough time or interested parties or, you know, some other things that could have occurred
Well,
since, you know, there was so much noise around
I
it
would say the
since,
same
you
people,
know, what was it, summer of
the same
2021, et
people are still
cetera.
running it. And in my experience, typically criminals stay criminals and liars stay liars. So I just, I really wonder. I mean, here's the thing. Maybe they have the money. Maybe they have all of the money. Well, within a few billion. I mean, we know that some of the assets they claim to have are probably bullshit, based on some of their investments that they claim and their secure loans, depending on what they're secured by. And there's a great writer named who goes by Patio11 on here on Twitter. And he actually has done a series of um, of articles. Patrick McKenzie, great writer. I would look up his blog because he's actually gone through every time Tether did an attestation and essentially proved that even if you take everything Tether tells you at face value, they still would have been insolvent. Like he does the math.
I think it's important to note. Right, no, I'm
No,
sorry.
so
No, go
he
ahead.
does the math, and he does it very convincingly and says, "Look, we can assume everything they tell us is true, and basically they'd have to be the greatest money managers in the history of the world, and they also would have had gotten very lucky on top of that, and even then they'd probably still be insolvent. So like, yeah, I mean, have they changed some things? Sure. Do they probably have a lot of the money they claim to have? Yes. Um, the problem is that they've clearly engaged in illegal activity like bank fraud. They've basically admitted to that in the past, right? Um, they're under investigation by the Department of Justice for a reason. They're people that run the company are connected to organized crime back in Europe. And so the thing would be is that even if they have the money, and it gets proven that that money is at least partially the product of crime or facilitating crime, it could all get seized. So like even if your tether is backed, if that happens, this has actually happened to Bitfinex, right? Or Bitfinex a couple of years ago when the DOJ seized $800 million of their money from Crypto Capital Corp. Like they had the money, but you know the fact that it was actually illegal proceeds meant that they lost that money, and that's why they had to commit the frauds that they did to kind of stay afloat. So I think there's enough risk there that I wouldn't be holding that stablecoin, and given that most of the industry is based around that stablecoin, I don't think I don't think I'd want to like tether my future to it, you know?
That's a
Yeah.
good one, man.
Dad joke. Dad
Thanks.
crypto joke.
But like what? And I encourage everyone to watch this goddamn interview because it doesn't make any fucking sense. Okay. Paolo, even though he is my profile picture, it is obviously a joke. Paolo gave an interview with that brilliant guy, Scott Melker. Uh, and this was like first or second week of March, right? So it wasn't the last interview he gave, which was a few days ago. It was the one before that.
Mhm.
Okay. And I'm sure that you watched it, but Paolo claimed that, the company or Tether is on track to generate 700 million in profit for the quarter, right? So, for Q1. Okay. And um and uh they 3 weeks later they came out with 1.5 billion, which is more than twice as much. And so in 3 weeks their profit expectations more than doubled. It just doesn't add up. It's not from interest income.
Well, just because they're so good at the business. I mean, that's the secret is that they just are geniuses who can do anything. So I actually have just added to the top of this one example from Patrick McKenzie's work where he actually goes through their attestation and shows in May of 22 that even if you take everything they say at face value, they were still unbacked. Obviously not 100%, but enough to show that even in the best case scenario, they still are not holding what they claim to hold. So giving them the benefit of the doubt still doesn't solve the problem. And so that's the question that ultimately is going to be what happens in terms of enforcement action. Assuming they don't fail before that. So yeah, it's going to be a fun few months, I think. What are we talking about next?
Yo, sorry, I'm in the middle of eating also.
You got priorities, man. It's all about the fun.
I mean, but like there's always a lot around what everybody just throws into the basket of FUD, right? That's why research is important, why everybody understanding it. It's like very complex. I'm not like saying that everything is like innocent, right? But I think like a lot of people just like to be like, oh, it's FUD, and they don't necessarily like understand the
Well, of
issues
course. I
around
mean,
it.
these people, like, look, I mean, I've been doing this now. This is for fun. I don't make any money doing this. I literally do this because I have no life. Like, I've been doing this for almost, 2 years now, I guess. And like, yeah, it's shocking the level of the lack of information people have, despite investing many times their life savings into these projects. They don't do the most basic due diligence. And, the people that argue with me or with other people I know who, when we say things like, hey, this CFTC lawsuit sounds pretty bad for Binance because they're basically saying they're engaging in money laundering. That seems like a problem. And people go, well, you're stupid. That's FUD. That's nonsense. And then it turns out they never actually read the lawsuit or even glanced at it, right? They never bothered to do the work.
It's not even like individuals. I've been brought in to like be extra set of like eyes on and look at things through my lens for funds, right? And I find that there's even been during 2021 there was even a lot of oversight or like not clear understanding into the dynamics from people that are professionals in crypto, like crypto
Well, I mean,
consultancies, which I
they're
found really
incentivized
interesting.
to make it,
Yeah.
that's the problem is that a lot of the people, a lot of people that know what's going on themselves, like they in public they'll say one thing, but in private they'll tell you they know that most of it's a scam. But their bread is buttered on by the people that they're supposed to be analyzing or speaking about, and they're compromised as a consequence of that. So
Sorry, guys. Was a little, but like, I don't know how you can give somebody, or I'm sorry, a company any kind of credibility whose quote unquote success is rooted in its opacity and lack of disclosure, right? And uh, refusal to give an audit. This is an $83 billion enterprise that does not give a financial audit. And I just laugh every time anyone from Tether speaks because their whole thing is, oh, we fulfilled our legal obligations. Well, if you're taking in dollars from customers, you actually have a fiduciary responsibility. Okay, and as a fiduciary and taking in customer dollars and allocating those dollars in exchange for USDT to safe instruments, you should open up your books, right? Am I crazy,
you're
Dirty Bubble?
crazy, I think, man. I mean,
Fucking
well, I mean,
crazy,
like if you
man.
don't
It's a
have
crazy
to, why
world we
would
live in.
you, right? Like, they're just doing what they're doing the minimum because they believe that they're they don't these guys don't believe in like any kind of the again, it's worth just looking back and looking at the history of the people that run this company, right? I mean, look at Giancarlo, who is this failed plastic surgeon who was like selling pirated porno DVDs, and then and when he got in trouble, his warehouse mysteriously burns down. Okay, like this is the people you're talking about. Like you're not talking about like up and reputable people. You're talking about people that have really shady backgrounds going back as far as we know about them, all of them. and they're now in charge of $83 billion. And that's the problem, is people don't just go straight, you know? So regardless.
It's
But
just, I mean,
I mean,
it's so funny. It seems like such a standard practice that just can't be performed, even after promising to do so for like 6 years. That literally interns can perform. I don't know, right?
Yeah, I'd like to touch on the prime trust, considering fiduciary responsibility. Uh, how is it that uh, a firm that is moving and off ramping like massive amounts of like, I'm just curious as to what went wrong and how they weren't able to cover their book, and with the massive amount of investment that they took in.
So
The CEO started DJing NFTs.
is that true? I didn't know that part. No, tell me, is that actually happened? Like,
You're talking about Scott
yeah, yeah,
Purcell,
let's
right?
see what.
With Bank, what he did with Bank, and now he pretty much jumped ship and formed
Right.
Fortress, right? Fortress NFT, by the way, is what it's
Oh,
called.
that's funny. No, so yeah, we
I
don't know
also,
why Prime is bankrupt yet, I don't think. There's a rumor that I think is fairly well substantiated that a couple of years ago they lost the keys to like roughly 24,000 ether, and then I mean, this is the problem. It's all rumors. We know that that's probably true. The question is whose money it was. Long story short, it sounds like they may have dipped into customer funds to cover that hole, and then maybe from there things just kind of spiraled. Um, the question of how they managed to raise, I think it was what, $100 million, and then still blow through that and go bankrupt in the process. We're gonna find out, I guess, man. I have no clue. Seems pretty questionable. The fact that they were a custodian who seems to have managed to lose their customers' money is also really concerning, and suggests that what they were doing with their customers' money was not what they said they were doing. Um,
But how do they allow him to just go and open up a new trust, Fortress?
well, that's a question for, I guess, Nevada, right? Is that in Nevada as well? Well, and, a lot of customers migrated their funds over to that, or to their services over to that trust. So I guess they must trust this guy in spite of the problems that Prime had. So who knows? I mean, you have to remember again, man. None of this shit makes sense, because these people, like, they don't have choices. Like, they have to do business with whoever will give them service. So like, there's only so many options. Sort of like doing business with Tether, right?
um,
Is it possible that some of the assets that are being redeemed aren't really the real assets somehow? Like, if their largest customers are Binance, maybe Justin Sun at Tron, what's this, True US
Yeah.
Dollar, and they have quite a few customers. Is it not that they lost I mean, obviously they have a huge amount of employees, but is it not that they lost those cryptocurrencies? Is it that they got scammed by these global companies that were redeeming assets somewhere along the way?
I'm not sure how that would make
I mean,
sense.
because
I mean, they would have to have the dollars. So like what it should be is like you give them Bitcoin and they put it in a wallet for you, and then they don't touch it, right? So like, and then when you ask for it back, they give it back to you. Like that's their business model. Or like, if you have cash, it sits in the bank account, and then when you want the cash back, they give you the cash back. Like, there shouldn't be like, the funds should be segregated, right? The funds should not be accessed by the corporation for any other purpose other than holding your money for you. So like, that shouldn't be possible unless they were giving money to people they shouldn't have given money to, or they were taking risks on things that they shouldn't have been taking risks on. And those are the only possibilities. So the question is, did they just take the money, or did they lose it on something stupid? But it's pretty clear they don't have the money. So
isn't it funny, Dirty Bubble, how like very similar things are happening now than what happened last year at the same time? Isn't
is
it
really
funny?
fun. I was just thinking about that. Yeah, how it's like the same, like a year later, almost exactly. Yeah, pretty crazy.
I also, I mean, I'll let bust in here and then Gordo Gordolvin after. But today, well, not today, but a couple days ago, Binance did announce that they hired a, well, gee, a former DOJ prosecutor that specialized in none other than money laundering and asset recovery. Must just be hiring a former DOJ lawyer for fun. And if you look at his prior speaking arrangements that he was a part of, actually the most recent one in February was about Bank Secrecy Act and money laundering. The one just before that, money laundering. The one before that, money laundering. The one before that, money laundering. You get the point, right?
Yeah.
Gee, I wonder what they would need his expertise for.
I actually just want to elaborate here, understating how good this guy is in terms of his credentials. His resume is astounding, and he is the best of the best in terms of he worked on the other side of financial enforcement crimes, and it's for the Southern District of New York, and also worked with
They're gonna fucking need it.
what?
They're gonna fucking need it.
Worked with the SEC. He's literally the probably the most qualified and most expensive and most experienced attorney. And allegedly, I love that they were like, "Oh no, he's going to be an expert witness." Although I never saw documentation, and you wouldn't choose an expert witness this early, by the way. None of that makes any sense. So I don't know why those comments were made or who they came from. Clearly bots or like shills. But you don't choose an expert witness, and then usually it's both sides that kind of agree upon who an expert witness would be. And as far as I'm aware, the SEC has not done anything, no such thing. But yeah, CZ's already made comments that point to him being like, "Oh, there was no $12 billion transferred to me." Like his criminal defense has already started, is all I'm saying.
Oh yeah, there's no question. I mean, there's absolutely no question that Tether to me is the mystery still. What's going to happen with that? But I don't think there's any question that Binance is going to face criminal charges very soon. Soon being the government's pace, not like reality or the pace we would like maybe. But it's like, why would you hire a money laundering expert for a case about securities, right? Like you wouldn't do that unless there's obviously charges coming in terms of money laundering. So regardless, we know what's coming. The fact that's amazing is that people consider on pretending like it's not going to happen. That's the part that really gets me, is that they still have all these, people that are considered leaders in this space or whatever who are basically denying that these facts are real. So they're in for a rude
I'm
awakening.
just going to say one thing without having to confirm or deny, what else I know. But the fact that there was already I think it was a deposition that was partially redacted, that was released as part of the lawsuit. First of all, the Department of Justice cannot share whatever information it wants with the SEC if it has an ongoing criminal investigation. However, the SEC is free to share whatever information it wants with the Department of Justice. And I can't imagine why there would be a redacted deposition that was performed by the SEC that was, and only certain parts of it that seem to address very specific SEC issues or issues in the SEC case, which would be like jurisdictional ones, would be filed as exhibits, if not for there being a criminal investigation and the full deposition being part of the exhibits in a criminal investigation. So yeah, there's that.
Yep. I mean, there's so many warning signs, and like at this point, I feel like both lawsuits were the SEC and the CFTC saying, "Hey guys, like it's coming." They're warning you. They've been warning everybody for a while. They've been doing everything they can to say, "Hey, it's coming." And just the fact that people are still sitting around going, "Oh, nothing's going to happen," or "It won't be that big of a deal." I mean, like they could seize their domain, right? Like they could literally shut down. They could shut down the whole town. They could shut down the whole stupid exchange, and people are going, "Oh, it's not that big of a deal." It's incredible, So
thing. The other stuff I feel like is all, but if you're trading on an exchange and you're basically creating the volume behind it, which was known for a long time. I mean, how can you support these numbers that are coming out of? I mean, I'm a complete Web3 pro. I'm pro all this stuff. I love it. I love the basis of this technology and what it can do. But I want to come back to the point that there's no way that many people are trading these assets. And the fact that you're sitting there and market making just to make your exchange the best, I mean, I hope they put him in jail, to be honest. Well, don't take me for that. But
Marc Cohodes, how are you tonight, sir? Welcome.
Living the dream. All's good. Anytime you can get Dirty Bubble to talk, I'll listen. He knows what he's talking about. I just heard some stuff. I just want to add that it takes the government, especially the DOJ, really years to put together a really good case. So I think the fact that no one has seen anything doesn't mean they're not doing it. And I think the wheels are turning. I think the wheels are turning quick, but you only have one shot to go after guys, and these guys are going to hire the best of the best lawyers there are. So they just have to make sure their case is really solid. But I think Binance is going to be done. I think Tether is going to be done. It just is going to take some time, and people shouldn't get frustrated about it. And someone brought up the concept about these VC guys, and there was some talk about Solana and my man David Sachs and those scumbags talking about their pump and dumps. Again, it's going to take some time, but it's the most obvious case there is and probably will be. And I think they're going to do these guys partly because what they did was illegal, partly you have to send a message that this stuff's not okay. So I don't think you can go after all the VCs. I think this Andreessen Horowitz has huge exposure. Cross River Bank, they're involved in Coinbase, they're involved in a lot of these other coins. But I think what happened with Solana and the fact that it's on tape and recorded for the world to see, I think it's somewhat obvious. It's fighting in broad daylight. So I would just sort of slow everyone's roll and slow everyone's expectations because these things do take time. And, you know, the DOJ throws people in prison. The SEC takes your money or bans you from the business. So it's a serious bunch, but I think it's all in the works. And I'll also finally say, and then I'll jump off this thing, there are an awful lot of lurkers on Twitter, as Dirty knows. There's people with the SEC who are hanging out. There are people with the DOJ hanging out. I know they've reached out to Dirty. I know they've reached out to me. So everyone's paying huge attention to what's going on. And, you know, they appreciate the skeptics, and you got to be careful exactly what you say on stuff because people are listening. That is for sure. But you're doing a good job, Dirty. I'm proud of you. And you do have a life. You have a good life, and it's fun getting to know you a little bit. That's sort of what
So you're saying we're all on a list?
I think we're not doing anything illegal, so I think I'm not, so I feel comfortable. I like the SEC people.
you're
And
not. It's not like, no, you're not doing anything illegal. Those guys who played the Solana game on whatever platform they were talking about, and however they elect to tweet and gaslight people, I wouldn't want to be them. But there's
Of course,
there's people definitely paying attention. I'll tell you
Oh,
that.
they're coming for them later. They later though. Baby
yeah.
steps.
The only problem is
So what happens in that meantime? In the time that it takes to prosecute them,
Well,
what
let's talk
happens to
about
this
why they
industry?
can't be prosecuted yet. Until we've actually established that the Securities of Act of 19 or the 1933 Securities Exchange Act applies to crypto, a lot of the same criminalities, and I mean they could pursue fraud charges or whatever. But even with I'm just going to laugh at a lot of the class action cases and you know, on the civil side that would come from the private side that are going to be coming forward, that are currently going forward right now, those would be under like Section 10B, and you can press criminal charges using a lot of the same regulations. So it's just, I think they're just waiting for that regulatory framework to be in place rather than trying to either, you know, dig around existing criminal laws or apply fraud, because usually with securities or financial crimes. It's just generally a variation of fraud. But it's
And
like it's just more specified already within the Securities and Exchange Act.
and Nora, like, isn't some of it complicated because of this? Like, at least the Solana one, I'm thinking of the class action one and the U.S. District Court for Northern California, right? You have Roche, and there's been all of that different, there's been some things around the legal team, right? So
Right. It's
yeah.
gonna. There's a lot of variation, and the thing is, like, so a lot of these cases end up getting consolidated, especially when it's multiple federal actions that have similar allegations. And I think that that's what's necessary to have this kind of at least cohesive regulatory framework for, at least on the civil side. And then, even on the criminal side too, it just will make things a lot easier. And there's a lot to go after. So, and the SEC, the government doesn't move very quickly as on the whole. Let's be real.
Well, that's
All right.
also, I just wanted
Can we let Gordo?
Yeah, let's let
He's been waiting
Gordo.
for a while. I just wanted to give him a chance to say his piece because he's been waiting for a good 20 minutes.
Gordo.
No worries. Thanks for the mic. Mark, thanks for your work on Silvergate and on Signature. Dirty Bubble, you may be involved in that as well, but it's hard to tell who Mark works with and who he doesn't. I'm just curious if I could ask you both a question, not Tiger and Dirty. In my mind, sort of a Black Friday scenario that hit the poker scene where the DOJ seized their not only the websites, but also the bank accounts, so they couldn't process any types of deposits and withdrawals. I'm just curious if you see parallels there with a player like Binance, and if the FTX scenario in your mind will be replicated. So we had FTX come under a lot of scrutiny. We had FTT, which is their own, proprietary coin, a pseudo bank run on that coin, which obviously took out so much collateral in the space and just shrunk everything down. I'm curious if you see a similar scenario with BNB and Binance and that running in parallel to what happened with FTX, or if you see a different angle amongst the stablecoins. I'm just curious where you see this all interweaving, if you had a crystal ball, because I'm trying to put the pieces together, but it's definitely a complex picture. So thanks.
I'll let Dirty Bubble go first.
Yeah, so I mean, the first part of the question about could there be this type of like massive regulatory action where they just get cut off from everything? I mean, to some extent, that's already happened, right? Like, they were using Silvergate, they got cut off back in 2021. They were using Signature, that's not happening anymore for a couple of reasons. And the government now has all of those banking records, incidentally, without ever having to do a warrant, which is kind of interesting, right? Prime Trust was one of the few places that they had access to dollars, at least Binance, and they're now out of the picture. So, the question of whether they're going to be cut off from the banking system, I think the answer is yes, and they may already have been cut off from the banking system, at least in any way that they can move real money. Could you see them just move in and just totally shut them down overnight? Yes, absolutely. I mean, that would be. I think it's not certain, but definitely it's very possible that's what happens. The question of exactly how this plays out, I mean, I have no clue, man. Like, would I have predicted that Sam Bankman-Fried would go bankrupt in like 4 days? No. Did I think he was going to go bankrupt? Yes. In 4 days, no. So you don't know how this is going to happen and how this is going to play out. There's so many different variables. I think the places to look. Yeah, I mean, any DOJ action against Binance is going to be pretty catastrophic for them, especially if they go the route of shutting down their websites or whatever else. I mean, that's a game over move. I think the question of, we don't know with this BNB where we don't know what he's been doing with it, right? We don't know if there's leverage baked into that somewhere. My guess is there is. They've denied that, but they're fighting awfully hard to maintain a certain price level of that, and that really suggests that there's a reason. So possibly they run out of money and they can't sustain everything, and then that's when it collapses. I'm sort of like Sam, but I mean, who knows, man? All I can say is that Ponzi schemes only stay afloat for so long. So
Yeah,
The,
and it's actually funny because I'm sorry, Mark. Did you have something to say, man?
well, I think Dirty's right. The one thing that I'll say is these things are all schemes. They're all massive frauds, one direction or another. And when things go, they go quickly because there's nothing underneath it. There's really no there. So it's literally like picking up nickels right in front of the freight train that's coming down the track. So I think it will be sudden. I think when the DOJ moves, I think they'll seize everything. I think it will be like poker, or probably worse because they're slow playing this to make everyone realize that this is all serious. So everyone should have plenty of warning to get all their money out.
Yeah.
So I mean the precedent has been there with FTX. So I think this is sort of the foreplay right in front of the sex act. So as I said months and months ago, I wouldn't have a dime in any of these things because I think they're all going to go. And how quick, when, no one knows except the DOJ. And those guys, Southern District doesn't talk to Eastern District. Eastern District doesn't talk to Main Criminal. I mean, these guys are all pods amongst themselves. So I think one day you're going to show up, it's all going to happen. And it's going to
Mark,
be sudden, swift, and deadly.
Lily,
are you
before
just
you
are you
go,
just I was just gonna okay. We're just
no,
gonna
go
ask
ahead,
for
ask the question.
clarification. If Mark, are you just talking about Binance and Coinbase, or you talking like
I
are you
think
talking
I
just
think
about
I think I think Coinbase is in better shape than Binance. I think Coinbase is in better shape than Binance and Tether. Coinbase may not have a business, but it's not what Binance does. It's something the government thinks they're not an exchange and they're trading things that are securities and they're not able to trade that. So that's going to take a while, but I don't think they can go shut it down. Binance they can shut down. Tether they can shut down if
Yeah.
if they want to.
I wanted to answer what Gordo said, because it's funny that you mentioned just shutting down the websites, because I did tweet about this a couple of weeks back, and I think it's interesting that I mean, obviously AWS is the biggest cloud service provider in the world, so it's not a surprise that they use AWS, but they did single them out in both the CFTC complaint and the SEC lawsuit. And I do have a theory that if the DOJ wanted to take drastic measures, there is a scenario where they can order AWS to shut off their servers and take control of the domain. And when they take control of the domain, even the non-AWS servers no longer work. And there are two instances in which AWS can be forced to shut off servers of a customer, and that is for non-payment and if the customer is under criminal indictment. Um, so, yeah, I mean, it's possible. It would be a very uh, extreme measure, but it is a lever that they can pull.
Yeah, I
If
think I think that would be the guillotine approach. And then one just last follow up. I'm just curious if you all think that Binance is more of a necessity for this ecosystem to stay afloat, or if stablecoins are more of a necessity. If you had to choose one or the other, what do you think is more critical for this scheme or Ponzi to continue its cycle? Thank you.
They're the same thing.
yeah,
There's no meaningful difference between the two entities, right? Like the stable coins, if anything, are holding the exchange's money and they're controlled. I mean, for example, right? So like what we should talk a little bit about TUSD before the space is over and how that sort of has become the white knight for Bitcoin in the last few weeks, despite very serious questions about its solvency and about its management. They basically have printed $2 billion out of nowhere, um, and have become the dominant like volume for Bitcoin trading recently, which kind of out of nowhere. But obviously, that's under the control of either Binance directly at this point, or if it's under the control of Justin Sun, who is by or CZ's buddy. These are all the same thing. So like if Binance fails, does Tether survive that? I really don't know. I don't think so, but maybe. If Tether fails, everything fails. So I mean, I guess the stablecoins are technically more important, but the stablecoins survive because the exchanges are able to maintain the peg. So they're the same. It's the same thing. There's really no difference between the two entities.
I mean, the fallout is different though, right? Like, I think, everybody talks about, and I'm not saying that any of this is like squeaky clean, right? I understand the history that Tether's had to play and what it's like grown into, right? What we've seen Hindenburg and Fir Tree and everybody try to be able to capture with, understanding what's going on there. I'm just saying there are set like people in countries, right, who have had serious problems with their current, like their countries where they have serious problems with their currency and they're not using their currency. They're using Tether to transact. Like, do you know what I mean? They're not, it plays a different role.
Well, but that's not
a
the
bit.
question. So like,
Yeah.
the issue here is that why is Tether worth $1 right now? It's not because you can go as a customer, like if you own Tether, you can't go to Tether and ask for your dollars. You can only do that if you're one of a very small and select group of people that Tether has deemed able to do so, right? So you owning Tethers does not entail you the rights to any real actual money. The only way you can get real dollars back is either through exchanges or by selling it into a different cryptocurrency and going from there, right? So the only way Tether is worth $1 at this point is because the peg is maintained, and it's maintained by market makers and exchanges, which are the same thing because we know that the exchanges and the market makers are the same people, right? So it's all the same thing, right? Like whatever you're using Tether for, whether it's good or bad, is a separate question. Just like there are people on these exchanges who are legitimate, normal individuals who are buying Bitcoin or trying to trade Doge and make billions of dollars or whatever. There are legitimate people using these entities. There's legitimate people using Binance right now. That doesn't make it like a legitimate organization or mean that it's going to survive. That's a completely separate question.
That's why I don't think that's, also stable coins aren't the same thing as the exchanges, and it's not the same thing we were talking earlier about the VC dynamics, right? It's not like just I think there's shades of how some of this can play out that it's really important to acknowledge. And one of the questions was, are these all the same? And there's a lot of like they're very related, right? But they're not exactly the same thing. Like
that's like,
getting rid of
that's like saying that,
but
the point is that the value, again, the value of stable coins in this ecosystem is dependent on exchanges and market makers, right? And exchanges and market makers are the same thing. And these guys are all doing business together and are talking on the same chats. And they're basically all related parties in a vast network of companies that are basically running Ponzi schemes. That's what's happening here. So like whether or not they're doing things, like whether or not stablecoins are providing a service that's legitimate for some individuals, or like, that doesn't make them legitimate, and it doesn't mean that the failure of an exchange like Binance isn't going to destroy the stablecoins as a consequence. I absolutely think that it puts them at serious risk of failing. Yeah.
Except you also, if you're starting to get into Justin Sun, and there's other people in here that have way more knowledge on that, like you also have, Hong Kong opening up for retail trade. I'm just going to play devil's advocate here, right? Because like, I'm not saying that I don't agree with like a lot of the points, but you do have, things opening up in Hong Kong. You have you have this new
but how does that
going more like live public?
How does that relate
Those are
to
irrelevant.
how does that relate to the liquidity that's already in the existing market and the value of Tether now?
Yeah, I mean the question is okay. The question would be, for example, if tomorrow the DOJ seizes Binance's domain, which is possible that could happen, given the things that they've been accused of doing, assuming that they have the evidence to do it. Theoretically, they could do that and shut Binance off altogether, right? What happens to the value of Tether in that scenario?
It's pretty unlikely.
That's the question.
Very unlikely the U.S. government would just seize the website out of nowhere.
It's happened before. Liberty Reserve is one example of that.
Liberty Reserve is not a major international company in the way that Binance is a major national company. It's not a good comparison.
Ian very much
I'm
have
sorry,
fun.
I'm
what is
saying
your
I
there's
argument,
know.
Zach?
I
Wait a
feel
minute,
sorry
wait a
for you. I
minute.
feel like somebody
Liberty
Hold on
really.
a
Reserve
second.
is
Hold on a second.
pretty different than Binance,
What
which
is
is
your argument, Zach?
that Binance is not going to get shut down overnight, and so this FUD that the stablecoins are all going to die
Oh,
because the
here we go with
FBI
the
is going
fun
to
word.
seize Binance, like it doesn't make a
Not the
huge amount of
FBI,
sense.
the DOJ. And also, they've already begun the process of seizing their assets and
So,
repatriating them. So I don't know exactly what you're thinking is happening. They've also stopped
no,
allowing withdrawals and of and purchases of fiat currency or like into their system. They're pretty much getting shut down. They got shut down in France, shut down in Belgium.
You're cutting out for me. I'm not
They
sure if you're
got
cutting out
shut.
for
They're
me.
already getting shut
Okay.
down in France, Belgium, a bunch of other countries. Nigeria doesn't even want Binance. So I don't know what you think is happening, or like if you're still going to live
does
in this
Tron not,
delusional place where this is not happening, but it's happening.
not fucking hear me?
Sorry, I couldn't know.
Great. All right, Zach. So do you think that Binance just hires lawyers that were former prosecutors at the DOJ for fun who specialized in money laundering?
Yeah, I think lots of people use the
Oh, you're a
Binance
fucking
platform to
idiot. I
launder
don't, I
money,
don't, I don't need
and
this.
so like they're absolutely going to.
So you think that
He's gone.
okay. I was like, he thinks they're going to hire a former SEC enforcer who is also a prosecutor for the Southern District of New York, which is the most, well known and for prosecuting financial crimes and the jurisdiction used to prosecute the biggest financial crimes in the United States. And they're going to hire that guy as part of their civil defense team. Yeah, seems a little weird.
Well, if you're asking the question, maybe you guys should have like let Zach stay up on the stage
Well, I
and
don't really know what Zach's
discuss.
talking about, Lily, and I don't really know what you're talking about either, to be honest with you. Like, what is your argument for Tether? Like, what is your argument? I don't understand.
My argument is like basically you guys are saying that because Binance is absolutely going down, right? Binance is going down, that Tether is automatically going down. And I'm just saying that
Shit.
there are
Well,
no,
they
shapes to
issue
no,
how some
Tether.
no,
of this stuff
no.
plays out.
Here's what I said. Okay, I did not say that. I did not say that it's absolutely certain that Binance goes down. For example, Robert Kennedy Jr. could get elected president before the DOJ does their job, and then he interferes, and then we all go to jail for criticizing him. Could happen.
No.
Possibly.
I know the Kennedys and I was
That's
working
a
for the
joke.
campaign. I was
It's a
like,
joke.
yeah, that's not happening. Trust me.
It's a joke.
It's not happening.
But the point being that obviously no one can predict the future here. All we're saying is it's very likely that Binance is going to face some very serious charges in the relatively near future. The question is what happens when, if that happens and they fail, what happens to Tether, which is their largest counterparty? I think it's going to be a problem for them.
You
That's all I'm
cannot.
saying.
Yeah, I just don't
Now,
understand.
And I agree
the other
with
thing,
that.
and the other, okay, so then there's no argument. The other thing that's interesting, and I've shared a tweet about this. A number of people have done some good work on this. Actually, the biggest contributor to Bitcoin trading volumes now is not Tether, right? It's this new stable coin, or actually old stable coin called TrueUSD, which until recently was a pretty much obscure coin that nobody had ever really heard of. That Justin Sun apparently runs in secret. Now that's suddenly the biggest in terms of volume, and they can't make redemptions like now. Like they're actively refunding people's crypto transfers to try to get their actual dollars back because they can't make the redemptions. They've sent out emails to their customers saying they can't do that, and yet here they are. They've literally minted a couple $2 billion in the last month. And it happens that those mints coincide with the recent increases in Bitcoin's price. So we're literally watching this happen in real time. And we're talking about, these hypotheticals. It's happening right now. Right?
This particular claim that Bitcoin's price action is due to tether printing has been around for years and years and years, and it hasn't been true any of the other
Did I
times
say
that people
Tether?
like you have
I
come
didn't say Tether. I said TrueUSD. Look at the prints.
even less relevant.
Okay, then let's just not even bother. I mean, seriously, dude. Why
I
are
want to
you
ask
even
Zach a
here?
question. Hold on, Dirty. I want to ask him a question. I'm sure you've heard of Bernie Madoff, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So he had a scheme for quite a while. So to say that just because people have been talking about it for a while and nothing's happened doesn't mean that it's not a fucking scam. And you know
Wait,
who's
is that the level of intellectual rigor we're going with
No,
here?
no
actually,
no
I
no
can
no
think
no
of
Murky
more
no.
Murky
intellectual
Madoff
rigor
was
than
Okay,
that.
around for
listen,
a
listen.
while, and
Nora,
All
don't
right.
No,
cut
no,
me
no,
off. Don't cut me off. Don't cut me off,
I'm
please.
not. I'm just going to post
Okay,
something
this
nice.
guy wants to be a smartass. This guy wants to be a smartass. I'm going by his logic. So your intellectual uh level here is that just because it's been talked about for years, that
you're doing great so
blah,
far.
blah,
Just
blah,
to let
blah.
you know.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I said you're doing great so far. In case you're wondering, this is going well.
Okay, listen, dude. If you want to be a smartass, then get the fuck out of here.
I already removed him. I'm done with that. Like, fuck that. You know, if I'm perfectly fine. Like, for example, Lily is doing an excellent job of being a devil's advocate. If you want to talk about, you know, whether or not our analysis is correct or bring up specific points, I'm perfectly fine with that. But if you're going to insult people, then I mean, don't even bother. Like, that's hard rule for me. I'm not going to waste my time on that. So,
Literally,
um,
don't tell me to invite people who are pieces of shit. Got it? Great.
Okay.
Zach's a piece of fucking shit.
I've
Hey,
had lots of talks
Okay.
with Zach. I don't share your sentiment. I
Well, he's a
also
piece of shit. You hear me? He's a
okay.
piece of shit.
Okay, you're entitled to your opinion.
hey, Mike. Do you remember in the past where you had the big Bitcoiners? You had your Max Kaisers, your Pomplianos, who used to basically be concerned about Tether and how it's a fraud, and then overnight they became the lovers of Tether and everything is fun. When did that happen? Was there
I don't
specific?
know. That's probably before my time, before I really got interested in this stuff, to be honest, because I always remember them as being very pro. There are individuals, I mean, I think there are some, maybe even in this audience, who are, you know, big Bitcoin promoters who operate companies in the space. So I think have tried to be, you know, tried to go after the scammers and tried to expose them. And I think that those people, you know, those people do exist. But I think that their voices are drowned out by people like Kaiser, who I think is completely disreputable. But I don't know. I guess people listen to him. Um, all right. Who has any questions? Anything we want to talk about? What's next?
Can we talk about Coinbase or
Yeah. What do you have? What question do you have about Coinbase?
just how do you see everything unfolding? What the current state? Because it seems to me like the market. I don't know how much you follow actual equities, but the market doesn't seem to care two shits about the SEC lawsuit.
Well, you have to think about who is still owning Coinbase shares at this point, and I think that they don't. I mean, first of all, it's going to take a while for the lawsuit to go through, right? So Coinbase is going to operate for a while. They're apparently going to continue operating as they've, you know, done in the past, without any regard for what they've been, you know, what this lawsuit is accusing them of or whatever. Um, so I don't know. I guess people think that the future is rosy, and that, you know, how many of $1 billion market cap it's at right now is what it's worth. I can't argue with the market, but you know, personally, I don't think that it's worth that. You know, I think that, you know, if the SEC wins or if Coinbase decides to try and settle, they're going to have a serious impact on their business, and they're already losing massive amounts of money doing business as they are right now. So, you know, I don't see how it's a positive for them, and I don't see them getting out of this very easily. Again, is it possible that, you know, for example, they hold out long enough, and maybe that's what they're gambling. Maybe they're gambling that a new administration comes in that's more friendly to crypto, and then things change. That's possible, right? I mean, if you look at the political activity of crypto and what they've done to, you know, actively try and subvert the regulatory apparatus, and try to keep themselves alive, I can't make a prediction about that, man, because like maybe it works. I think it'd be a really bad thing if it did, but maybe it does. It's possible. Maybe that's what people are betting on.
Yeah. Also, the 10 states that sent them a cease and desist, and the
Right.
fact that if they were in fact operating a legal operation, yeah, even in the meantime, while the lawsuit is going on, wouldn't they have to kind of temporarily halt a large portion of that, even if it's
Well,
going
so
to take
that's
years
staking.
for the?
So that's just against staking. So it would be the staking portion of their business in those 10 states. Obviously, the difficulty of regulating a business like Coinbase, um, it depends on how strictly they want to follow the rules, I suppose. If their customers want to try to fudge things, maybe they can continue to service some people in those states. But staking is only one part of their business. It's not. I don't remember what percentage of their revenue it is right now. I think it's at least 10%, but it might be more than that. So that's the part that the states moved against specifically. They made no allegations as to trading, as far as I'm aware. But I mean, that's still a significant part of their business. And the other part of their business that's being really affected lately is USDC, which they get a lot of money from the interest on that because of the agreements they have with Circle. USDC's market cap has been cut, almost in half at this point in the last just few months from redemption. So they're seeing, even though interest rates have gone up, they're actually seeing that income, being dwindling simply because of USDC being slowly bled out. So I mean, I don't know. Obviously, like I said at the beginning of this call, I'm biased in certain things. I'm short Coinbase. I've been short Coinbase a long time. Um, you know, so I obviously am biased towards thinking that it's a shitty company that's going to go to zero, but that's my bias.
That's fantastic. That's exactly what I think. So they own half of USDC, and the way I see things, the way I see why USDC was created was kind of to take over for Tether, because Tether has a baggage, right? So you want a new, better coin with a good name, USD in the name, to replace them. That kind of didn't come to fruition. But hypothetically speaking, if they are as dirty as Tether, which I think they are, and Coinbase owning 50% of this enterprise, that would have pretty big ramifications for Coinbase, right?
Well, I mean, I don't think that they're as dirty as Tether. I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously, we're going to find out, right? Like, the questions for Tether is who have they been doing business with and whose money have they been taking all of these years? That's the question that I think is going to be very important. Is USDC doing business with those same people? It's possible. But I mean, I definitely think that USDC has the money. I would be really, if they don't, I would be shocked. I mean, they've been managed to pay out, at this point, what I think they maxed out around 50 billion. They paid out something like 22 billion in redemptions at this point, without any problem. So that suggests they're actually holding the money that they claim to. So I don't think they're as dirty as Tether, but I still think that long term, it's really a question as to how sustainable their business is going to be.
Right, and just one last question here: have you noticed what the largest USDC pair is, which is Tether on Binance?
Right. Yeah. No, it's
So
always
isn't
been
this
that case.
weird? Why would you need to exchange USDC for Tether and on Binance?
Well, and I
Is
think
that the sole existence of it?
it's used for trading on Coinbase, right? Like USD and USDC on Coinbase, I think are kind of interchangeable in terms of volumes. You have to consider that if what the SEC is saying is true, which we all know, if anybody who's in crypto knows it's true, that there's a significant amount of wash trading. Tether's volumes are actually inflated, so USDC might not have all that bad of a comparison. I really don't know. It's hard. You can't model that, but what is it really used for? Yeah, it's used for cashing out, right? Like, it's used for people with real money in the system to get money out. It's used for people with Tether to get their money out. That's what it's used for. So that's why that pair is so dominant. But let's see. How about?
Well, also, I want to touch on one other thing because I think somebody commented on it, and Dirty Bubble was actually the original one to come or to figure this out. He wrote a Substack article on it. US and Binance International have no segregation. Essentially, Binance US is kind of an on ramp for CZ and Binance to US banking, right? And there's no actual real volume on that exchange. It's basically just CZ watch trading through Murky and Sigma chain, which is all the volume on there. And if you just look, if you deposited funds on Binance US, they were never custodied at Binance US. And this was outlined in the lawsuit, actually, where basically if you deposited funds into Binance US, they're actually custodied at Binance International, right? So to tell me that funds aren't being commingled and being moved around for other uses, I'm sorry, I call bullshit. And it also doesn't the whole reason why they over collateralize in their proof of reserves, their bullshit proof of reserves report on stable coins doesn't make any sense. So I think some of customer funds were commingled into that proof of reserves report to over collateralize. I don't know if that's right. Dirty Bubble, like what do you think about that?
I mean, we have no way of knowing, right? Like the problem is we don't know what their liabilities are because they'll never tell us. So we'll find out when they can't pay people back, or they do, and that's really the only way you ever find out with these things is when they're put under stress, right? Like FTX, there was a lot of signs that there were things that were wrong and there was probably money missing, but you didn't really know that for certain until they failed, and so that's when we'll find out. Let's see. How about we do Nico?
What's up, guys? I just wanted to Tiger, the exchanges. I want to answer that question real quick. The exchanges, we can't tell because the exchanges don't do the trades like on chain. They do it all with house with their own software. But what I wanted to say, TUSD, that was basically on Tron. You guys are right, but the whole thing behind Tron was people would just send stable coins there and redeem them somewhere else. Like it was wild. The whole reasoning behind Tron, because Tron, I believe, has the most volume or the second most volume, and it's all wash trading, obviously, but there's nothing going on that blockchain at all. So it was all just with the stablecoins moving around, and most of that was done in Asia. I'm really surprised at what's going on, like that this whole thing with Prime Trust actually affected them.
Well, it's because they have to have access. At some point, if you have dollars, you have to. If you want your dollars back, you have to have somebody who can give you those. So you have to have a bank, right? So that's why Prime Trust and companies like it are important in this ecosystem. That's how they access the real financial system. They get out of crypto fantasy land and go back to the real world. All right, let's see. How about Phil?
Hey, what's going on, guys? Dirty Bubble. I'm just kind of curious. There was a recent report of, I think it was from 2021 about like the commercial paper backing Tether, right? Was it that year? So like 2 years ago? I just want to refresh my memory on that for my question.
I think it was 20. I mean, they just published the actual data, so we actually know what they were holding at least at one point. That was published a couple weeks ago.
So I guess a two-parter for you. Supposedly that's what's backing Tether, right? I mean, as of 2020, who knows? Right. Who knows if they're backing it with U.S. Treasuries that are now yielding higher? Well, I guess everyone's yielding higher now because everyone's forced to raise rates when the Fed does. But what do you think is currently backing Tether beyond what we might know? And then what do you think is backing USDC?
Well, I'll start with USDC because that's easy. They publish. I mean, again, let's give everybody the benefit of the doubt. Let's assume that what they're telling us is true. Okay, we can do that just for the sake of simplicity. I'm not saying that I necessarily believe anything that any of these people tell me, but USDC tells you what they hold, which is treasuries and dollars. And they actually tell you the specific issuances and the distribution of those issuances in their reserves reports every quarter or every month or every quarter. I can't remember, but USDC is fairly straightforward and transparent, right? Let's see. I can pull up Tether's reserves and let's take a look at what they say they're holding right now. So Tether is holding, as of a couple of months ago, they claim to have 53 billion in treasuries, 7.5 billion exactly in overnight reverse repurchase agreements. Okay, another 7.4 billion in money market funds, and then about 500 million in cash. And that makes up a very large chunk. That's about $69 billion of the total, right? They also claim to have about $3.4 billion in precious metals, which, let's see, gold. So they own gold. They own Bitcoin. They're actually, at this point, Tether is almost sort of I wouldn't say it's an algorithmic stablecoin, but it's certainly backed by something that's price is determined by Tether. So it's definitely some circular logic there. Their quote unquote other investments, which is my favorite category, it's $2.1 billion, which categorizes or comprises other investments by the group that do not meet any of the criteria set out in the other categories. So it could literally be anything. Then they have secure loans of $5 billion, which they say are over collateralized by liquid assets, which again could be literally anything. So, speculation, BNB, for example, could be collateral for secure loans from Tether because it is technically a liquid asset. So, assuming that Tether is telling the truth about all of this, right? We know that a good chunk of it is real, but there's definitely at least $7 billion or eight and a half, depending if you consider Bitcoin to be worth something or not. That is very questionable in terms of the assets they have back in the stablecoin. So that's the difference between the two. Now, the commercial paper, as far as we know, according to Tether, they got rid of the commercial paper. They suffered no losses by doing so, and they managed to transition over to treasuries without losing a dollar. So maybe that's true.
Wow.
I have no way of proving that is or not. But Tether has basically shown that they're probably the best traders in the world, right? If you look at the top of this chat, the second tweet that I've shared is from Patrick McKenzie, who's an excellent writer and has gone through multiple of Tether's attestations in the past and showed that even by their own standards, even if you take everything they say at face value, there are still points at which they've been unbacked in the last year. So I would really recommend reading that because it shows you just how absurd some of the claims that they make are. But it's worth it.
Well, what's kind of absurd is that I know that Tether as itself, a company, is really only run by a few people, right? I mean,
right.
Like I'm not a trader myself, but to be as successfully backed as Tether claims to be, wouldn't that take more than just a couple people running the books?
Question is, I mean, you can't, that's the problem. You can't make assumptions about that, right? Like they could be hiring that out, right? Like they have individual, like Cantor Fitzgerald, for example, and other companies that at least hold their treasuries for them. Could they be outsourcing some of these things? They almost certainly are. So you can't, I don't know if you can draw a conclusion about their legitimacy from the number of employees they have, although certainly it's a little bit odd to say the least.
I think it goes beyond that because I keep asking myself, who the hell is Tether?
Well, that's a good question. I think that you can wait a couple of years and we'll maybe know the answer to that.
Yeah, I would.
Can we get to b.Future?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks for hosting this space. It's a great discussion that we're having. A question maybe to get at the mechanism by which all of this goes on. How does Tether go from being unbacked to being backed? Or how does last week or 10 days ago when CZ moved the true US dollar minting contract over onto Binance Smart Chain and minted more than $1 billion of true US dollar stablecoins, he probably knows he can't get away with those being unbacked forever. So how does he get them from being unbacked to being backed? I've got some hypotheses about it, but curious if others have thoughts on it.
Well, of course they're all backed. I mean, CZ wouldn't lie to us, right?
Well,
but I mean, so one possibility that has been bounced around is that if you have substantial control over a market, you can do lots of things, right? So if you can know what's going to happen ahead of time, you should be able to make money, right? One of the reasons I thought Sam Bankman-Fried wasn't as insolvent as he was is because somebody has to be making money in this ecosystem, right? Like there's been billions of dollars of real money that's been sucked out of, individual investors' pockets. So somebody must have that money. So that's the one theory is that that's how they managed to plug the holes. I think Tether, the theory about how did they back the or cover the $800 million loss they had when the government seized their assets, the EOS sale is thought to have maybe contributed to that, plugging that hole. But I don't think we know. And then as to what CZ's doing right now with True USD, I mean, I don't know. I feel like that might just be the mark of somebody who's really desperate. And maybe he doesn't know if he's ever going to be able to plug that hole or not. And he might not have to because it might be too late before he might not, there might never be a chance for him to do it. All right.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. Could I present my hypothesis on what's happening, say with True USD? I mean, we saw him make wash trading of the true USD BTC pair free, and he created 10 billion plus of liquidity on that pair in the last 7 days. Why would he do that? Well, liquidity begets liquidity, and he needed to suck traders into trading the clean BTC for the counterfeit TUSD that he's just minted out of thin air. And he can even start to, buy BTC at higher prices, which drives the BTC price up with all of his counterfeit TUSD, because he needs to move that $1 billion TUSD position, and he needs to get clean BTC. And once he gets the clean BTC, of course he can run to a third-party exchange or through one of the mules and swap it for real USD or some other fiat, and then he can buy bonds or real assets to back the TUSD position that he's just minted. So
Right. Yeah, exactly. They in theory you can use this position of absolute power to manipulate the market and ultimately make the money back that you claim to have in the first place. That's exactly the model that people think that Tether may have used to get out of the various holes they've been in the past. But I mean, again, we don't know, right? I try to be so like obviously I'm pretty negative. Obviously everybody calls me a fudder. That's fine. I try to be as unbiased as possible in my very biased way. So that's why I say things like maybe it's possible they have the money, or maybe it's possible that they did this or that. I mean, my opinion is that they probably didn't, but it's possible they did. Now, unfortunately, I think I'm going to have to take off because I do need to actually work
Can
my
you
real
yield your
job
time to me,
tomorrow.
please? Can
So,
you yield your time to me?
will I yield my time to you?
Yeah, because I have my hand up.
Come on, Jimmy.
Thank you for joining us, Dirty Mike. Much appreciated for all your information, your knowledge, and all the work you've done. And this is very exciting to go down this path and figure it out and bring these scammers to justice.
Yeah. Have a good one, guys.